The notary's stamp hit the paper with a hard, wet thunk, like a gavel finding bone. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, steady and indifferent. The air smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. An office trying to cover up how long it had been awake. I sat in a padded chair that felt too soft for what was happening, my shoulders still carrying the straight-backed habit of a woman who lived by checklists and consequences. Across the table, my father held a pen like it was a champagne flute. He was smiling, wide, casual, practiced. The same smile he used when he wanted the world to believe his life was a story of freedom instead of a trail of unfinished responsibilities. Beside him, an advisor in a tight suit scrolled through numbers on a tablet, nodding as if my childhood home was nothing but a line item. A notary waited with a calm face and a faintly impatient posture, hands folded near the stamp. My father didn't look at me right away. He looked at the paper. He looked at the pen. He looked at the room as if the room belonged to him. Then he finally glanced up, and his eyes snagged on the edge of my uniform, on the name tape, on the rank, on the quiet authority I didn't have to announce. His smile tightened. "Still playing Navy?" he said. 6 words. Small, neat, sharpened. I felt my keyring press against my palm where I'd been holding it under the table without realizing it. House key and Navy ID on the same loop of metal. The ridges bit into my skin like the truth trying to leave an imprint. I kept my voice level. "Why am I here?" My father waved the pen toward the advisor like he was offering me a tour of his brilliance. "We're fixing things." The advisor didn't speak. He just tapped his screen and waited for my father to finish performing. My father leaned back, chair squeaking. "Turning the place into income. Finally. Airbnb, short-term, easy. I'll be overseas, living. Living." That word landed wrong in my chest like a boot on a loose stair. The last time he used that tone, light, breezy, unbothered, I had been small enough that my feet didn't reach the floor when I sat at the kitchen table. The notary cleared her throat softly. A gentle sound. A reminder that time moved whether or not families did. "I just need confirmation," she said, polite. "And then we can proceed." Proceed. The advisor slid a folder toward my father. The paper made that dry office whisper as it moved across the table. My father rested his hand on it. Possessive, familiar. "This is my property," he said, louder than necessary, as if volume could become proof. "Always has been." The fluorescent light caught the faint tan on his face. Vacation tan, not labor tan. His wristwatch flashed once, expensive and unnecessary. I stared at that watch and remembered something else on a table. Something smaller, sadder, more honest. A crumpled bill. A note. A silence that lasted a month. I blinked once and the office hummed away, and I was 12 again. The refrigerator in our kitchen clicked and sighed like it was tired of keeping secrets. Morning light fell in a pale strip across the linoleum, catching dust I didn't know how to clean yet. The house smelled faintly of dish soap and old wood. My mother's ghost in the corners, even though she'd already been gone long enough that her perfume had stopped clinging to the coats in the hallway. I padded in barefoot, hair tangled, backpack half-packed for school. The note was on the table like a dare. Gone to Europe for a month. There's $50 on the table. Be smart. The handwriting was my father's. Confident loops, casual cruelty. The $50 bill lay beside it, flattened under a salt shaker as if it might blow away. I remember touching it with 2 fingers and feeling the paper's thin resistance, like it was already warning me it wouldn't stretch far enough. I listened for movement. Nothing. No suitcase rolling. No shower running, no clink of keys in the bowl by the door, only the refrigerator's slow breathing and the distant sound of a lawnmower outside, someone else's father doing someone else's job. I read the note again. My stomach tightened into a small, hard knot that didn't have a name yet. I didn't cry. Crying felt like a thing you did when someone was there to notice. I folded the note once, twice, carefully, and slid it into the drawer where my mother used to keep spare batteries and coupons. My hands were steady because I didn't know how not to be. Then I took the 50 and stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the cabinets. Empty. Not fully. Not dramatic, just fudge, thin. A half box of noodles, peanut butter with scrape marks, a can of soup with a dented label. The kind of pantry that told you someone had been meaning to grocery shop for weeks. I went to school anyway. The hallway smelled like floor wax and cheap cologne. Kids laughed too loud, lockers slammed. Teachers called names like the world was normal. I learned how to answer questions with lies that sounded tidy. Where's your dad? Working nights. How's your family? Fine. In the grocery store after school, I pushed a cart with one hand and held the 50 in my pocket like it was a fragile animal. The fluorescent lights in the aisle made everything look sickly. I picked the cheapest things I could find and tried to do math in my head while my stomach argued with my pride. Instant noodles, eggs, milk if it was on sale. At checkout, the cashier's scanner beeped in a rhythm that felt like judgment. I smiled like a grown-up and prayed the total stayed under 50. At home, the house sounded too big. Pipes ticking, wind nudging the window, the fridge clicking again and again like it was counting the days. That was the month I learned the difference between being alone and being abandoned. Being alone was a circumstance. Abandonment was a choice. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was brave, because I was terrified of what would happen if I did. Foster care, pity, questions, a spotlight. I had already learned that attention could be dangerous. So I kept the lights on. I washed my own clothes. I rationed the food. I did homework at the same kitchen table where the note had landed, the same table that felt colder at night. And every time I turned the house key in the lock, I thought, if he comes back, I will not be the same child. But when he did come back, when the month ended, he walked in like he'd only been gone for milk. He smelled like airport cologne and duty-free soap. He tossed a snow globe onto the counter like it was an apology. The glass clicked against the laminate. Look, he said, cheerful. Paris. That was all. No guilt, no explanation, no, are you okay? No, how did you eat? Just a souvenir and a grin. I held the snow globe in my hands and watched the fake snow fall slowly onto the tiny plastic city. It felt like watching something pretty cover something rotten. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just put the snow globe on the shelf and started building a life where disappearance had consequences. Years later, that life had a uniform, a clearance badge, a chain of command that didn't pretend absence was love. And now, in this loan office, my father was still trying to live like consequences were for other people. The office came back into focus with a faint ring in my ears, like I'd surfaced from deep water too fast. The notary's stamp sat on the table, waiting. My father's pen hovered over the signature line. The advisor's eyes flicked to me, brief, calculating, then back to my father as if I were just an inconvenient detail in their math. My father tapped the folder twice, impatient. Tell them it's fine, he said. 7 words, a command dressed as familiarity. I looked down at my keyring. My Navy ID swung slightly when my hand shifted, plastic against metal. Soft clack, soft truth. I had been trained to read patterns, to notice what didn't belong, to track what people tried to hide inside paperwork and polite smiles. And the one thing my father never understood was simple. I didn't need to raise my voice. I only needed the right document at the right time in front of the right witnesses. I lifted my gaze to the notary and kept my tone even. Please don't stamp anything yet. The advisor's jaw tightened. The first crack. My father's smile faltered like a cheap light bulb. What's your problem? He snapped. 4 words. No charm left. I reached into my bag slowly. No sudden moves, no drama. Just a controlled motion that made the fabric whisper. The zipper made a short, sharp zzzt that cut through the office hum. Inside was a thin folder, plain and unremarkable. The kind of folder that ended fantasies. I set it on the table, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Because the final blow wasn't a fist, it was timing. And I had learned timing at 12, standing in a silent kitchen with $50 and a note. My phone vibrated once, quiet, insistent, against my thigh. A new email. The subject line glowed on the screen like a flare in the dark. Title alert, action required. And I realized my father hadn't just been planning a trip. He had already tried to sell my childhood like it was his boarding pass. I didn't open the email. I watched his pen. and his hand started to shake. I kept my thumb on the edge of my phone and didn't open the email. The glass felt cold and slick, like a blade you could still pretend wasn't sharp. Across the table, my father watched me the way gamblers watched cards, trying to read what I had before I chose to show it. The office lights hummed. Somewhere behind a wall, a copier coughed and whined. The advisor shifted in his chair, leather creaking, and the notary's stamp waited like a judge with patience. My father leaned forward, voice dropping into something meant to sound reasonable. "Stop making it weird." 5 words, a warning dressed as concern. I let the silence hold him. My keyring pressed a half moon into my palm. House key. Navy ID. The same loop of metal. 2 lives welded together. The email subject line glowed in my mind because it wasn't new to me. I had seen it before, weeks earlier, half a world away, under red lights and recycled air. On the ship, the night shift tasted like burnt coffee and salt that never fully left your skin. The passageway outside the Intel spaces was always a little too cold, as if steel needed reminding it was in the ocean. Fans rattled overhead, steady as breath. I sat at my terminal with my hair pinned tight, sleeves rolled just enough to work, and my brain running in 2 lanes, mission and maintenance. That was what I told myself, that I was maintaining. Then my phone had vibrated against my thigh, once, like a quiet knock on a coffin. I'd checked it between briefings, expecting some bland update. Bank balance, spam, a friend's meme. Instead, title alert. Action required. The words hit like a sudden pressure change, that underwater squeeze behind your eyes. My fingers had gone numb for a second, as if my body wanted to refuse what my mind already understood. I opened it. A county-linked alert service I'd signed up 4 years ago, back when I first learned adults could steal with paper, had flagged activity tied to an address I knew better than my own heartbeat. My house, the house I'd grown up in, the house I'd kept alive when my father treated it like luggage. There was a reference number, a filing type, a date, a name that should not have been anywhere near my property. His. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The fluorescent lights above my station flickered once, a soft buzz that made the moment feel sick and wrong. I should have gone to my chief right away. I should have said, "My father is attempting something illegal," and asked for guidance, for time, for structure. But the 12-year-old inside me didn't trust systems. She trusted locks, lists, and staying quiet long enough to survive. So I did what I'd trained my whole life to do. I collected information. Between watches, I pulled up public records on a secure personal device, careful with lines I wouldn't cross. I read filings the way I read reports, slow, precise, hunting for what didn't belong. My eyes tracked the language. Interest, authorization, encumbrance, troths. Words that sounded clean while they ruined you. I printed what I could when I got back to port. The printer spit out warm pages with a dry, dusty smell, and I held them like they were evidence from a crime scene. I kept hearing my father's voice in my head, cheerful, careless, like the month he left had never happened. Be smart. He'd said that to a child with $50. Now he was daring a grown woman with clearance and patience. The week I flew home, the airport felt too loud, too bright. Rolling suitcases clattered like gunfire on tile. The air smelled like cinnamon pretzels and jet fuel. People hugged with both arms, laughing, crying, living lives that made room for tenderness. I walked through them with my duffel on my shoulder, my uniform folded inside like a flag I didn't want to wave unless I had to. Outside, the cold wind slapped my cheeks sharp. I breathed it in and felt my lungs remember home. I didn't go straight to the house, not yet. First, I drove to the county recorder's office. The building sat in plain daylight, all brick and glass, pretending it wasn't a vault for everyone's secrets. The lobby smelled like paper and old carpet. A line of people shuffled forward, shoes squeaking on tile, each of them carrying folders as if their lives could be made safe by Manila. I waited, listening to the low murmur of voices, the beep of ticket numbers, the cough of a bored security guard. When it was my turn, I slid my request under the glass and kept my hands still. The clerk was polite in the way people were polite when they didn't know they were holding your throat. She typed, nails clicking fast. "Address?" she asked. I gave it, Her eyes flicked to the screen. You're the owner? The question landed like a stone in my stomach. I wanted to answer with a story. I wanted to say, I earned it at 12 at midnight with a can of soup. I wanted to say, I paid for it with every holiday I didn't get, every deployment I did. Instead, I said, yes. One word, clean, final. She printed a summary. The paper slid out warm, smelling faintly of toner, and she passed it to me. And there it was. An unfamiliar motion attached to my home like a parasite. A new lien inquiry. A preliminary filing. The kind of thing that didn't happen unless someone was trying to borrow against what they didn't build. I read the date again. It lined up perfectly with a period when I'd been underway, when my father probably assumed distance meant defenseless. My jaw tightened until it hurt. I thanked the clerk. My voice didn't shake. Outside, my fingers trembled around my keyring. Metal bit skin. The house key felt heavier than it should have, like it knew it was being challenged. In my car, I sat for a moment without turning the engine on. Sunlight poured across the dashboard, bright and rude. I pulled the keyring up and stared at the two things hanging together. My Navy ID, my earned name, my house key, my inherited burden. I remembered the note again, not as ink this time, but as weight. That $50 bill pinned under salt. The way the house had sounded when it realized it was alone. I drove home. The neighborhood looked smaller than memory, like time had shrunk it. A dog barked somewhere behind a fence. Leaves scraped along the curb with a dry, restless sound. When I parked in front of the house, my hands hovered over the steering wheel. The house sat there like it always had, modest, stubborn, familiar. The paint was a little worn near the porch rail where I'd once leaned too hard carrying groceries alone. The front step had the same faint chip on the right corner. It still looked like mine. I walked up the path, boots crunching on gravel. The air smelled like damp earth and pine. I touched the porch post with my fingertips just once. A quiet check-in, like a pulse. Then I tried the key. The lock turned, smooth. The door opened with a soft groan, like it recognized me and wanted to complain at the same time. Inside, the air was cool and slightly stale, the smell of old wood and lemon cleaner. My own cleaning, my own effort, my own history. I set my bag down and moved through the room slowly. No dramatic music, no sudden horrors, just details that made my throat tighten. A framed photo of my mother on the hallway table, her smile caught in glass. I brushed dust off the frame with my sleeve and felt the static cling. The kitchen table. It was the same table. The same one where the note had been, where the 50 had waited like a cruel joke. I ran my hand along the edge, feeling the worn groove where my fingers had gripped as a kid trying not to panic. And then I saw it. A new envelope on the counter, crisp and white against the faded laminate. The return address was a lender. The paper looked too official to be harmless. My name was printed correctly, spelled right, like someone had finally decided I existed. My fingers hesitated before I touched it. The envelope felt thick, expensive. It made a faint crackle sound as I lifted it like dry leaves. I opened it. Inside, a notice of inquiry. Not a final foreclosure, not yet. Just a polite threat in professional font. Confirming interest, confirming the start of a process. Confirming someone had already spoken on my behalf. I didn't need to guess who. I exhaled slowly, and the sound was harsher than I meant it to be. My chest ached with a familiar, old rage, the kind that didn't burn hot but sat heavy and cold, a cast iron pan left on the stove too long. I pulled my phone out and looked at the older email again. The title alert, the reference number, the date. Then I did the one thing I hadn't done at 12. I called him. It rang twice. He answered with laughter in the background, music, glasses clinking, a life that sounded easy. Hey, Tess. My name in his mouth felt like theft. What did you file? I asked. 6 words, no greeting, no warmth. He chuckled like I was being dramatic. Relax, it's business. 4 words, a dismissal. It's my house, I said. 3 words, A line drawn. He sighed, annoyed now. Don't be so emotional. 5 words. The same old script. My fingers tightened around the keyring until the metal hurt. Meet me. Title office. Monday. 6 words. A command I'd earned. He paused, just long enough to tell me he felt the shift. Then he recovered, voice smug again. Bring your little costume. 4 words. The cut aimed straight at my identity. I ended the call without answering. The quiet afterward rang in my ears. The refrigerator clicked on, humming like a witness. Sunlight slanted through the blinds and striped the kitchen floor like bars. I went to the drawer where I'd hidden the note years ago. The wood rasped softly when it slid open. Inside were old batteries, faded coupons, and a folded piece of paper that had waited patiently for my adulthood. I pulled it out. The note was thinner than I remembered, edges softened by time. His handwriting still looked confident, still looked unashamed. I set it on the table beside the lender notice, then I laid my keyring down between them. Metal, plastic, proof. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't break anything. I started building a folder. Deed copies, tax receipts, maintenance invoices, the alert records, anything that made ownership real in the only language my father respected, documentation. By Sunday night, my folder had weight, my mind had even more. And Monday morning, when I walked into that title office with toner on my fingertips and steel in my spine, I wasn't walking in as his daughter. I was walking in as the woman he created by leaving. Back in the present, across the table from him, I rested my hand on my plain folder and watched his pen hover. My father's knee bounced once under the table. A tiny tell, a crack in the performance. The advisor cleared his throat, uneasy now. The notary's stamp sat perfectly still. My phone buzzed again, another email threading into the same chain. My father leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Open it, he said. 2 words, a dare. I didn't. I slid the folded note, the original note, the one that started all of this, out of my folder just enough for the corner to show. A flash of old paper, old ink, old cruelty. The notary's gaze flicked to it. The advisor blinked, registering that this wasn't a normal signing. My father saw the edge of that paper, and his smile finally died. Micro hook. His hand reached for the note, then stopped, as if the past could bite. His hand reached for the note, then stopped, as if the past could bite. The corner of the paper showed just enough to change the air in the room. The advisor's eyes moved faster now, no longer bored. The notary's fingers hovered near her stamp, the way people hovered near a door when they sensed weather coming. My father swallowed once. He tried to turn it into a scoff. What is that? He asked. 3 words, but his voice lost its shine. I slid the note the rest of the way out and laid it flat on the table, ink facing up. The paper looked small under the harsh lights, small, like the 12-year-old it was written to. It's yours, I said. 2 words, no heat. He leaned back, searching for the version of the room where he was still in charge. That was years ago. 4 words, an escape hatch. It was a month, I said. 3 words. A measurement, not an argument. The advisor cleared his throat and glanced at the notary, then at the signature line waiting for my father's pen. We can pause, he offered carefully. If there's a dispute of ownership, my father cut in, voice sharper. There's no dispute. 3 words, too fast. I turned my gaze to the notary. Please verify the vesting deed. 6 words, formal, calm. The notary's eyes lifted to mine, and for the first time, she looked like she saw what I was. Not a daughter throwing a tantrum, but a person who had arrived with a plan. Do you have documentation? She asked. I did not open my plain folder yet. Not fully. Not the way my father expected. I pulled out one sheet, just one, an innocuous summary from the recorder's office. The paper was crisp, smelling faintly of toner and bureaucracy. I slid it across the table until it sat in front of the advisor. His eyes scanned the lines. I watched the tiny change in his face when he found the name under owner. Mine. The advisor blinked once, then again, like a man waking up in someone else's house. My father leaned forward. That's not. The advisor lifted a hand without looking at him. Sir. One syllable, a stop sign. My father's jaw worked, the way it used to when he didn't get his way at restaurants. You're going to take her word? 6 words. The old tactic. Make me sound irrational. The advisor kept his voice neutral, but his shoulders tightened. It's not her word, it's record. 7 words. The first crack that mattered. I felt my keyring cool against my palm, the house key's ridges familiar as a scar. I set the keyring on the table beside the note, letting the metal make a small clink. The sound was soft, but it landed. My father's eyes flicked to it, then back to my face, and he tried to smile again. It came out crooked. You always were dramatic, he said. 4 words, still trying to shrink me. I didn't rise to it. I didn't need to. I'd learned a long time ago that the best revenge wasn't volume. It was procedure. I turned to the advisor. Who initiated this file? 4 words. A question with teeth. The advisor hesitated, then tapped his tablet and scrolled. The room filled with the quiet clicking of his screen. Tiny, relentless sounds like rain on glass. My client, my father said too quickly. Me. 1 word, a claim. The advisor didn't look up. Sir, there's a name on the intake. My father's pen rolled under his fingers. I saw his knuckles pale for a second. It's a family thing, he snapped. I'm her father. 6 words, as if biology was a deed. I'm the owner, I said. 3 words, as if truth was a wall. The notary shifted, chair squeaking. She reached for her stamp and pulled it slightly closer to herself, not toward the paper, but away from him. A small, quiet act of self-preservation. I can't notarize a contested transaction, she said. Not today. 8 words, clean, final. My father's eyes widened, and the warmth drained from his face. Contested? By who? 3 words, he already knew. By me, I said. 2 words. No tremor. He pushed his chair back abruptly. The legs scraped the floor with a harsh, ugly sound. A few heads in the waiting area turned. The office felt smaller, like the walls leaned in to listen. My father leaned over the table, voice low. Don't embarrass me. 3 words, but the plea had threat underneath. I met his eyes. You did that alone. 4 words. Quiet. Accurate. His nostrils flared. For a heartbeat, I saw the man who left a child with $50 and called it smart. Then he pasted on a grin and aimed it at the advisor. Look, he said, waving a hand like he was brushing crumbs away. She's emotional. She's been away. 7 words, a smear wrapped in concern. The advisor's gaze flicked to my uniform again, and I watched his calculation shift. People treated uniforms like either costumes or contracts, depending on whether they wanted to believe in accountability. I didn't argue. I opened my folder just enough to show the thickness of it. Receipts, copies, dates. A decade of silent maintenance stacked into paper. The advisor's eyes narrowed with professional dread. My father's grin thinned. What is that? 3 words, a crack of fear. Records, I said. 1 word. A verdict. He reached toward my folder. I moved my hand, not fast, not dramatic, just enough to close it and pull it back toward me. The zipper made a short, final sound, like a door locking. No, I said. 1 word. A boundary. He froze. His hand hovered over empty table space, fingers curled like he didn't know what to do without permission. The advisor spoke to the notary, voice careful. We're going to suspend this file pending verification. The notary nodded once. I'll document the pause. The advisor looked at me. Ma'am, do you have a certified copy of the deed? I had it. It was in the folder. It was ready. But I didn't hand it over like a gift. I handed it over like a weapon with a safety on. I pulled out the certified copy, raised seal catching the fluorescent light, and placed it in front of the notary, not my father. The paper smelled faintly of wax and government storage. The notary examined it, fingers gentle over the seal. She checked my ID, then checked the name again, then looked up. This reflects you as vested owner, she said. 6 words, and I watched my father's face tighten at each one. He barked a laugh. It sounded hollow. That doesn't mean I can't. He stopped because the advisor's expression had changed. Not outrage, not sympathy, risk. Sir, the advisor said, without your name on title, you can't pledge the property. 14 words, but he spoke them like a single locked gate. My father's tongue pressed against his teeth. He glanced around the room, at the waiting area, at the notary, at the advisor, measuring how many witnesses he had accidentally gathered. He pivoted back to me, eyes hard. You're doing this for attention. 6 words. A lie he needed. I kept my voice low enough that he had to lean in to hear me. I'm doing this for the house. 7 words. The house, not him, the child, not the man. The advisor slid the suspended paperwork into a different folder, his folder now, with a careful motion, like moving a sleeping animal. We'll need to rerun verification, he said, and we'll need all parties present. 12 words. Procedure tightening around my father's ankles. My father straightened. He tried to reclaim height, authority, entitlement. Fine, he snapped. Schedule it. 2 words, like he was still the boss. The advisor didn't flinch. Our supervisor will schedule. 5 words, a polite demotion. My father's eyes flashed toward my uniform again. Of course, he muttered. They love a sob story. 8 words. Still cutting, still cheap. I didn't react. I picked up the old note and folded it once, twice, the same careful way I had at 12. The paper made a soft, tired whisper. Then I slid it back into my folder, back into my control. The notary stood, chair legs scraping softly. I'm going to file the journal entry, she said. This transaction is not completed. 11 words. A sentence that felt like oxygen. My father opened his mouth to protest, then caught himself because a woman in the waiting area was staring at him. Not curious, not friendly, just watching the way you watched a man who was losing his mask. He grabbed his coat off the chair, fabric rustling sharp. You think you've won, he said to me, eyes narrowed. 5 words, a promise of trouble. I think I've started, I said. 4 words, a truth. He leaned in close enough that I caught his cologne. Expensive, bright, empty. You owe me, he hissed. 3 words, the oldest lie. I looked at his watch, then at his pen, then at the blank signature line that would not be filled today. I paid in childhood, I said. 4 words. A bill settled. His face twitched just once, as if something underneath him had shifted. He left without another word, heels striking the tile too hard. The door chime rang as he pushed through, cheerful and wrong, like a joke at a funeral. When the door shut, the office seemed to exhale. The advisor rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers, then looked at me with something like reluctant respect. Ma'am, he said, if there's attempted misrepresentation, I cut in gently. There is. 2 words. No theatrics. He nodded once, slow. Then we need to escalate. 4 words. The system finally turning its face toward me, I stood, smoothing my uniform without thinking. Habit? Control? Amartar. The fabric felt crisp under my fingertips, reliable in a way my father never had been. Outside, the daylight hit my eyes hard. Cold air rushed into my lungs, clean and sharp. I stood on the sidewalk with my folder under my arm and my keyring in my fist, metal cold against skin. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt the next step forming, like a map in my head, each turn already marked. Because my father wasn't done. Men like him didn't stop when they met the first locked door. They looked for a window. My phone buzzed again. A new email, new subject line, same address. Secondary inquiry. Different lender. My stomach went still and my grip tightened on the keyring until the house key bit into my palm. My phone buzzed again. Secondary inquiry. Different lender. For a second, the world narrowed to that line of text. The winter air felt sharper, like it had teeth. Cars hissed past on wet pavement, and the exhaust smelled metallic and sour. I stood on the sidewalk with my folder under my arm and my keyring clenched so tight, the ridges of the house key stamped my skin. He hadn't stopped. He'd just changed doors. I walked to my car without rushing. Control mattered. Panic was a luxury I'd never been able to afford. The leather of the steering wheel was cold under my palms as I sat, breathed once, and forced my heart to match my breath. Then I opened the email. Different lender, same property, same pattern. The language was polite, clinical, verification, interest, authorization, like a knife wrapped in velvet. I started the engine. The heater coughed warm air that smelled faintly of dust, and I drove straight to the house. Inside, the quiet met me like an old obligation. The refrigerator hummed. The floorboards gave a soft creak beneath my boots. Sunlight slid across the kitchen table in pale stripes through the blinds, and that table, my table, waited with the same patience it had when I was 12. I set my folder down. I set the keyring beside it. Then I pulled the old note from the drawer and unfolded it with careful hands. Gone to Europe for a month. There's $50 on the table. Be smart. The ink looked a little faded now, but the meaning hadn't softened. I laid the note next to the new lender inquiry and stared at both until my vision steadied. Not because I was lost, because I was aligning myself. The child who survived with $50 didn't need comfort. She needed strategy. I reached for my phone and made 3 calls in a row. First, the county recorder. The clerk's voice came through tinny and flat. Recorder's office. I need to place a fraud alert on my property, I said. 10 words. Straight. There was a pause, keys clicking in the background. We can't stop someone from submitting, she said, careful, but we can guide you on affidavits and monitoring. The word monitoring made my jaw tighten. Monitoring was what you did when you couldn't lock the door. I thanked her anyway and wrote down every form name she gave me. The pen scratched paper in short strokes, the sound crisp in the quiet kitchen. Second, my homeowner's insurance agent. Not because insurance fixed fraud, because people like my father love to turn inconvenience into leverage. The agent spoke in soothing corporate phrases. I asked for verification of coverage, proof of continuous payment, anything that reinforced a simple truth. I had been the one keeping the lights on. Third, legal assistance. On base, the legal office had a smell of carpet cleaner and coffee that had been reheated too many times. The waiting chairs were lined up like confessionals. Fluorescent lights flattened everyone into the same tired color. A couple in civilian clothes whispered over a folder. A young seaman bounced one knee hard enough to shake the chair. I sat still, uniform crisp, folder heavy on my lap. My keyring hung from one finger, the metal cool and steady. When they called my name, the lawyer, Lieutenant Commander Hale, shook my hand with firm, brief pressure. His office was small, neat, and too bright. He listened without interrupting while I laid out the facts. I didn't give him a speech. I gave him a timeline. Abandonment at 12. House maintained by me. Deed vested to me. 2 lenders contacted within days. Father attempting to represent ownership. Hale's pen moved in measured strokes. Do you believe he forged your signature? The question landed clean, surgical. I believe he tried, I said. 3 words, and I meant them. Hale nodded once. We'll treat this like fraud until proven otherwise. 8 words. The first sentence that felt like someone else was finally holding a corner of the weight. He slid a notepad closer. Options. File an affidavit of ownership, place additional title monitoring, and send cease and desist letters to any lenders contacting you. If he's misrepresenting, it needs to be documented. Documented. That was my language. I opened my folder and pulled out the certified deed copy, the recorder summary, the lender notice, the title alert printouts. Hale's eyes scanned, sharp and calm. You did the right thing pausing the notarization, he said. Now we make it expensive for anyone to ignore reality. 12 words. I felt my shoulders loosen a fraction. I left his office with a checklist and a stack of forms. Outside, the wind carried the scent of cut grass and diesel from the motor pool. Somewhere, boots struck pavement in a steady cadence, other lives moving with purpose. On the drive back, I kept seeing my father's face in the title office. The moment the advisor said record, the moment the notary pulled the stamp back toward herself, the moment his pen stopped being power. At home, I worked like I was prepping an op. I made copies, I labeled tabs. I built a binder that could survive hostile hands. The paper smelled like toner and glue. The staple gun snapped with each press, clean and final. I didn't play music. I didn't distract myself. Silence was my focus. By nightfall, the kitchen table looked like a war room. I placed the old note at the top of the stack, not because it was legally relevant, but because it reminded me why I couldn't afford mercy with him. Mercy was what he counted on. Mercy was what let him walk back in like nothing happened. My phone lit up with his name. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. A minute later, a text came through. "Stop. You're embarrassing me." 5 words, still about him. I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, "We can split profits. Be fair." 6 words, a bribe. I looked down at the $50 note on the table and felt something cold settle into place inside me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was his pattern wearing new clothes. Then a third text, "I'll come by tonight." 4 words, a threat disguised as a visit. The air in the house felt suddenly thinner. The porch boards creaked once outside, just the house settling, but my pulse jumped anyway. I stood and walked to the front door. The deadbolt clicked loud when I turned it, the sound echoing into the hallway. I checked the chain. I checked the window latches. The motions were quiet, automatic, like muscle memory from a childhood that had learned locks were love. I didn't sit back down. I went to the closet and pulled out the small lockbox where I kept irreplaceable papers: passport, birth certificate, my mother's last letter, and the deed copy sealed in plastic. The box was heavy and cold in my hands. I carried it to my bedroom and slid it under the bed, far back, where the shadows lived. Then I sat at the kitchen table again and waited. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere down the street. The smell of someone's dinner drifted in faintly through a vent, garlic and onions. Ordinary life continuing as if my father hadn't aimed a lender at my home. At 9:12 p.m., headlights swept across my living room wall. I didn't move. Footsteps on the porch, 2, then a pause. The doorknob rattled once, testing. A sharper rattle followed, impatient. Then a knock, hard enough to vibrate the door. My father's voice came through the wood. "Tess, open up." 3 words, a command. I stayed seated. My fingertips rested on my keyring, the metal cold. "Go home," I called back. 2 words, not loud, a laugh. Short, brittle. "Don't be childish." 4 words, his favorite weapon. I kept my voice even. "This house is not yours." 5 words, the truth, repeated. Silence stretched. The porch boards creaked as he shifted his weight. I pictured his jaw working, his eyes scanning for a neighbor to witness him as the wronged party. Then his voice lowered, sharper. "You owe me." 3 words. Again. I stared at the old note on the table, the one that said, "Be smart," as if survival was my job alone. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it change my tone. "I owe you nothing," I said. 4 words. A door closing. The knob rattled again, one last attempt, then stopped. Footsteps retreated, heavy on the porch boards. An engine started. Tires rolled away on damp asphalt. I exhaled slowly, and only then did I realize my shoulders had been tense enough to ache. I didn't feel victory. I felt clarity. He would keep coming. Not because he needed the house, because he needed the feeling of taking. Taking was his religion. My identity, my uniform, my discipline, my independence was the emblem he wanted to spit on. He couldn't spit on it directly in public, so he tried to stain it with paperwork. That night, I emailed the second lender with a firm, documented response, proof of ownership, fraud alert notice, and a demand that all communication be routed through me, not anyone claiming to represent me. Then I did something I'd avoided for years. I called a title attorney recommended by Hale. Her name was Marisol Kwan. Her voice on the phone was calm and clipped, like she'd heard every version of human mess and refused to be impressed by any of them. "Someone is shopping your house to lenders," she said after I summarized. "That's not accidental." 9 words, no comfort, just accuracy. "What do we do?" I asked. 4 words, simple. "We pick the venue," she said, "and we pick the witnesses." 8 words, a plan forming. She explained the next steps: a formal letter to any lender involved, a request for the lender's file and intake documents, an appointment with the title company supervisor, a recorded meeting with a notary present, and, if needed, law enforcement involvement for attempted fraud. Her words were methodical. Each sentence felt like a rung on a ladder out of chaos. "When can you meet?" she asked. I looked at my kitchen table, at the note, at my binder, at the keyring, house key, Navy ID, past and present welded together. "Tomorrow," I said, one word clean. After I hung up, I stood in the dark kitchen and listened. The house made its small sounds, pipes ticking, wood settling. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and paper. I placed the $50 note back into the drawer, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wanted to carry it to the right place at the right time. I slipped the keyring into my pocket and felt its familiar weight against my thigh. My father thought he could win with charm and shortcuts. He didn't know I'd grown up on shortages and consequences. The next day, I walked into Marisol's office and signed a retainer with a pen that didn't tremble. The paper was thick, the ink dark. Her assistant scanned my documents with a machine that whirred softly, like a quiet engine starting. Marisol looked up at me. "If he shows again," she said, "don't argue. Document." 9 words. A rule. I nodded. "I won't argue," I said. 3 words. A promise. She slid a card toward me with a meeting time and a location. The same title company, but this time with the supervisor present. Public, procedural, witnessed. A stage built for truth. When I stepped back outside, sunlight hit hard and white. The cold air stung my nostrils. I read the appointment details again, then tucked the card into my binder like a mission brief. My phone buzzed as if my father sensed the shift. A single new text. "Last chance. Don't ruin me." 6 words. Still about him. I didn't respond. I opened my calendar and confirmed the meeting. And as I did, a quiet thought settled into me, steady as a salute held in silence. If he wanted a public story, I would give him one. But I would make sure it ended with paperwork, not pity. My thumb brushed the edge of my keyring in my pocket, and the metal caught against my skin like a reminder. Soon, he wouldn't be able to rattle my door. He'd have to face mine. The morning of the meeting, I woke before my alarm and lay still, listening to the house breathe. The heater clicked on with a tired sigh. Somewhere in the walls, a pipe ticked like a metronome. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner from the night before, and my throat felt tight in that quiet way it did when I was about to walk into a room where someone planned to lie with confidence. I dressed in uniform on purpose, not because I wanted to intimidate anyone, and not because I needed to prove anything to my father. I wore it because it reminded me how to stand when I didn't feel like standing. Crisp fabric, clean lines, a structure that didn't care about my feelings, only my discipline. At the kitchen table, my binder waited, thick with tabs and timestamps. I ran my fingers once along the spine, then clipped my keyring to the inside pocket of my bag where it wouldn't jingle. House key, Navy ID, same loop of metal, same reminder. I had survived the kind of childhood that made paperwork feel like a weapon. Before I left, I opened the drawer and took out the note. The paper was thin and tired, creased exactly where I'd folded it as a kid. His handwriting still looked easy, still looked shameless. I slid it into a clear sleeve and placed it at the front of the binder, not for sentiment, because it anchored me. If my father tried to twist the story into misunderstanding, that note would keep me honest. Outside, the sky was flat and pale. The cold air pinched my cheeks and smelled like wet leaves. I drove to Marisol Kwan's office with the heater low and my thoughts locked on one thing: keep it public, keep it documented, keep it calm. Marisol met me in her conference room with a legal pad and a mug of black coffee that smelled sharp enough to wake the dead. The room was glass on two sides, transparent, deliberate. Like she believed secrecy was where bad people grew bold. She didn't ask how I felt. She asked what had changed. I handed her my phone and showed her the second lender inquiry. Her eyes narrowed as she scrolled. "He's shopping lenders," she said. 3 words, ugly and accurate. She slid my phone back and tapped her pen once. "We don't chase him, we box him." 7 words, a plan, not a pep talk. Marisol had already sent letters overnight. Formal notices of ownership. Demands for the lender's intake files. Warnings that any reliance on unauthorized signatures would expose them. She'd also requested the title company supervisor attend the meeting, along with a compliance officer. "People behave when compliance is watching," she said. 5 words, the kind of truth I trusted. She opened her laptop and the screen's glow lit her face, cool and steady. One lender responded. My pulse tightened. With what? 2 words. Marisol rotated the laptop toward me. A scanned page sat on the screen. An intake form. My address, the property description, a signature line that claimed to be mine. The signature wasn't mine. It was close enough to fool a stranger who wanted to approve a loan. But I knew my own hand the way I knew my own voice. The slant was wrong. The pressure was wrong. The loops were trying too hard, like someone imitating confidence. My stomach went cold. Marisol watched my face without flinching. "That's your proof," she said, "but we don't spend it early." 8 words, procedure with restraint. I stared at the signature until my jaw ached. He forged it. 3 words. The child in me wanted to spit them like poison. Marisol's tone stayed even. "Allegedly," she corrected. Then softer, sharper. "But yes." I exhaled through my nose and forced my shoulders down. Rage was easy. Control was the point. She clicked to another page. "Also," she said, "the borrower listed isn't him." My eyes snapped up. "It's a business entity," she continued. "LLC, newly formed. That's common in scams, creates distance, muddies accountability." The room felt suddenly too bright. The coffee smell turned bitter. My fingers found the edge of my keyring through my bag, metal cold and grounding. Marisol closed the laptop. "Here's what happens today," she said. "We go to the title company. We request the lender file and the notary journal from the paused signing. We put the supervisor on record that you are vested owner and that there is suspected fraudulent activity tied to the property." She leaned forward slightly, voice dropping. "Your father will try to perform. Let him." 6 words. A permission slip I didn't know I needed. I nodded once. What do I say? 4 words. Simple. Marisol's eyes held mine. "Almost nothing," she said. "You let documents speak." 7 words. The kind of violence I preferred. On the drive to the title company, my phone vibrated twice. My father's name lit the screen like a flare. I didn't answer. A text followed. "Meet alone, no lawyers," 5 words. A trap. Another text. "You're still my little girl." 6 words. A lie, pretending to be love. My grip tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles paled. The leather was warm from the heater, but my hands felt cold anyway. I didn't respond. I didn't give him friction to spark against. When we pulled into the title company parking lot, I saw his car already there, parked near the entrance like he owned the building. Of course he was early. Men like him believed arriving first meant controlling the story. Marisol parked 2 rows back, deliberate. "Breathe," she said. 1 word. A command. I breathed. Inside, the lobby smelled like air freshener trying to cover old carpet. The same burnt coffee lingered behind the counter. The same fluorescent buzz flattened the world into a pale hum. But today, there were more people. A couple with a baby in a carrier. An older man holding a folder with trembling hands. 2 real estate agents laughing quietly near a brochure rack. A receptionist tapping her nails against a keyboard. Witnesses. My father stood near the seating area, coat draped over one arm, hair too neat, smile already loaded. He looked at me like he'd been waiting to reclaim something. Then his eyes shifted to Marisol, and the smile faltered. She brought a lawyer, he said. 3 words, complaining like a child. Marisol didn't look at him. She walked to the reception desk and spoke calmly, presenting her card. Her voice was professional, low, and impossible to hook with drama. The receptionist nodded, then made a call. My father turned to me, lowering his voice like we were sharing a secret. His cologne hit me bright and empty. This is overkill. 3 words. A scold. I kept my gaze steady. You made it necessary. 4 words. No heat. His eyes flicked to my uniform again, the familiar irritation resurfacing. Playing hero again? 4 words. A cut. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The supervisor arrived a minute later, a woman in her 50s with sharp glasses and a posture that said she didn't tolerate mess. A compliance officer followed, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression like a locked drawer. The supervisor extended a hand to Marisol, then to me. Ms. Kwan, she said. And Ms. Mercer? My last name sounded heavy in her mouth, like she understood it belonged in files. Yes, I said. 1 word. My father stepped forward quickly, smile rebooted. I'm her father, he announced. This is family. 7 words, trying to shrink law into sentiment. The supervisor's eyes didn't soften. Today is a transaction issue, she said, not a family issue. 9 words. Clean separation. She gestured toward a conference room with glass walls visible from the lobby, public but controlled. The kind of room designed so nobody could later claim, that's not what happened. We walked in, the door shut with a soft click. The hum of the lobby became muted, like the building itself was leaning in to listen. On the table, the supervisor placed a folder, my paused signing file. The compliance officer opened her tablet and began recording notes. Marisol set my binder down with a quiet thump that felt like setting a gavel on wood. My father sat across from me and crossed his legs, trying to look relaxed. His foot bounced once, betraying him. The supervisor looked at all of us. We're here because a transaction was paused, she said, and because concerns were raised about authority to encumber a property. She looked at my father. Mr. Mercer, do you have proof you are on title? My father's smile twitched. I don't need proof, the supervisor repeated. 1 word sharpened into a blade. Marisol slid my certified deed copy forward, seal catching the overhead light. My client is vested owner, she said. Any attempt to pledge this property without her authorization is improper. My father's jaw tightened. She's overreacting. 2 words. Dismissal. I met his eyes. I'm reacting correctly. 3 words. Calm. Final. The compliance officer's fingers moved across her tablet. Tap, 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 each sound a quiet nail in a box. The supervisor opened the paused file and read. This was initiated by you, she said to my father, with claims of ownership. My father leaned in, voice sharpened. I raised her. It's mine. 6 words, the ugliest kind of math. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice low. You left. 2 words, enough. His eyes flashed. I came back. 3 words, as if returning erased abandonment. Marisol cut in, tone neutral. We also have evidence of separate lender inquiries, including an intake form bearing my client's name and a signature that appears inconsistent with her known signature. My father froze for a half beat. Tiny but real. Then he laughed, too loud. That's ridiculous. 2 words. A bluff. The supervisor's expression didn't change. It's serious, she said, and it requires review. The compliance officer finally looked up. We'll be requesting the full lender file, she said, including ID used, IP logs, if applicable, and any communication records. Her voice was flat, administrative, worse for him than anger. My father's foot stopped bouncing. He leaned toward me, voice low and urgent now. Stop, please. 2 words and 1 plea. The first time he'd ever begged me for anything that wasn't convenient. I stared at him and thought of the refrigerator clicking in an empty kitchen, of the $50 pinned under salt, of the month that taught me the world didn't care if you were 12. I kept my tone controlled. You had a month. 4 words. A memory turned into a boundary. The supervisor closed the file folder with a firm, final motion. Paper thudded against paper. We're suspending all action on this property from our office pending investigation, she said. And we are documenting this meeting. She looked at my father. Do not return to attempt a signing. 8 words. A direct order. My father's face tightened until his smile became a grimace. He opened his mouth, probably to insult my uniform again, to find the old angle that always stung. But the compliance officer spoke first. Mr. Mercer, she said, if forgery is involved, we may refer this externally. The room went very still. Even through the glass walls, I saw movement in the lobby slow, like people sensed a shift in gravity. My father stared at the table as if the wood had betrayed him. Then he lifted his eyes to me, hard, wounded, furious. You're doing this to hurt me. 7 words. Projection. Perfectly aimed. I answered softly, and my voice didn't shake. I'm doing this to stop you. 7 words. The truest thing in the room. His nostrils flared. He pushed his chair back, legs scraping the floor with a harsh sound that cut through the conference room's sterile quiet. He stood too fast, coat sliding off his arm. This isn't over, he hissed. 3 words, a promise. Marisol didn't move. The supervisor didn't flinch. The compliance officer's fingers resumed tapping, documenting his threat like it was just another line item. My father walked out of the room and into the lobby, where the glass walls made his exit a performance he didn't control. Several people looked up. A baby fussed softly. A brochure rack clicked as someone bumped it, startled. He paused near the front desk like he wanted to say something loud enough to reclaim dominance. Then he saw the supervisor watching him, and the compliance officer watching him, and me watching him without fear. He swallowed, turned, and left. The front door chime rang, cheerful, wrong, and the cold air rushed in behind him like a verdict. I didn't move until the door shut. Then the supervisor looked at Marisol. We'll cooperate with your requests, she said, and we'll flag this property for heightened scrutiny. Marisol nodded. Thank you. 2 words, but I heard the steel behind them. The compliance officer stood. Ms. Mercer, she said to me, we may need a specimen signature for comparison. I nodded once. You'll have it. 3 words. Simple. As we left the conference room, the lobby's noise returned in a thin stream. Papers shuffling, muffled conversations, a printer whining behind the counter. I walked out with my binder pressed against my chest and my keyring heavy in my pocket. Outside, the wind cut across the parking lot, clean and cold. My lungs filled with it, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. Not because it was finished, because the trap was set. On my phone, a new email arrived while we walked. Subject line plain, almost boring. Lender file response, attachments included. My thumb hovered over the screen, and I knew, with a quiet certainty, that the next pages would decide whether my father walked away embarrassed or walked away in cuffs. I opened the attachments in the parking lot, engine still running, heater breathing warm air that smelled like dust and old vents. The wind nudged the car gently, and my screen lit my hands a cold blue as the files loaded one by one. PDF. PDF. JPEG. Evidence arriving in tidy formats. Marisol leaned in from the passenger seat, her coffee scent sharp and bitter in the small space. Don't skim, she said. 2 words. A rule. I didn't skim. The first document was the lender's intake packet. My address sat at the top in bold, my childhood home turned into a target. Under borrower, a new LLC name sat like a mask. Under authorized signer, my legal name appeared, typed cleanly, confident, wrong. Then the signature page loaded. My name was there in ink that tried to mimic mine. The loops were too round, the line pressure didn't match. It was a stranger's hand pretending to be my life. My throat tightened anyway. because even when you expected betrayal, seeing it in black ink still felt like a slap. I scrolled. A scan of my driver's license appeared next. An old version, expired years ago. The photo was me at 19, eyes too soft, smile too polite. I hadn't seen that image in a decade. Marisol's voice stayed calm. Where would he get that? I already knew. I saw the kitchen drawer in my mind, the lockbox under my bed. The way my father had moved through the house once, years back, just visiting, glancing at shelves like he was shopping. I kept scrolling. A bank statement, mine from a year I'd been deployed. A tax form, a pay stub, my pay stub, Navy LS formatting, my rank, my base. My stomach went cold. The heater kept blowing warm air, but my hands felt like ice. He hadn't just tried to borrow against my house. He'd reached into my uniform and used it like a costume. Marisol's jaw tightened. That's identity theft, she said. 3 words. A clean label for something that felt personal. I swallowed slowly. He stole my paperwork. 4 words. The sentence tasted like metal. A new file loaded. E-sign audit log. Timestamps, IP addresses, device types, a neat trail of digital footprints. I didn't know much about tech beyond what my work demanded, but I knew enough to recognize the shape of a lie trying to look organized. Marisol tapped the screen. This is good, she said. 3 words, not comfort, confirmation. What's good? I asked. 2 words. She pointed at the timestamp. You were underway, she said. You have proof. 7 words. The ocean itself as my alibi. I stared at the date and felt a strange, hard satisfaction. The ship's fluorescent hum came back to me. The recycled air. The midnight watch where I'd sat with coffee and discipline while he'd sat somewhere else forging a signature. He'd assumed distance meant weakness. He hadn't considered time zones and logs and the way the military documented everything. My phone buzzed again, and his name lit my screen like a dare. I didn't answer. Marisol took the phone gently from my hand and flipped it face down on the console. Not yet, she said. 2 words. Another rule. I inhaled. Slow. The car's interior smelled like paper and coffee, and the faint plastic of my binder. I placed my keyring on the dashboard for a second, the house key and Navy ID catching a thin stripe of winter light. 2 lives, 1 loop, 1 truth. I scrolled to the last attachment. Call record, customer verification, audio. The file name sat there like a sealed envelope. My fingertip hovered over it, heat prickling along my skin. Marisol watched me. That's for the meeting, she said. 5 words. Controlled. Deliberate. I didn't ask how she knew. I trusted her instincts the way I trusted a good chief. Because survival had taught me the cost of ignoring competence, I closed the files and started driving. Back at her office, the conference room's glass walls reflected my uniform back at me, crisp, controlled, almost untouched by what I felt underneath. The overhead lights were too bright. The air smelled faintly of printer toner from the copy room down the hall. Marisol printed the audit log and highlighted the timestamps with a yellow marker that squeaked softly against paper. She laid out the pages like a map, each line a road leading back to him. Next, she said, we file a report. 2 words. Procedure again. With police? I asked. 1 word, with everyone, she said. Local, lender fraud, title fraud, we create pressure from multiple angles. 12 words, but she spoke them like a checklist. I nodded once. My mouth felt dry. Do it. 2 words. Her assistant brought in forms. The pages were thick, warm from the printer. The stapler snapped. Pens scratched. The sounds were small but relentless, like the house itself finally getting witnesses. When the report asked for relationship to suspect, my hand paused. Daughter. The word sat there like a bruise. I wrote it anyway, because truth didn't care how it made me look. As Marisol emailed the packet, my phone vibrated again, this time with a message, not a call. You're ruining everything. 3 words, still about him. I stared at the screen until the letters lost their shape. Then I typed one reply and deleted it before sending. At 12, I'd learned silence kept me safe. At 32, I'd learned silence sometimes protected the wrong person. Marisol finished the emails and looked up. "The lender wants a fraud resolution meeting," she said. My pulse tightened. "When?" One word. "Tomorrow," she said, and they requested he attend. 8 words. The trap tightening. I exhaled slowly. "He'll come." 3 words, I believed it. Marisol slid a printed email across the table. The lender's message was polite, firm, and loaded with legal caution. It named the attendees compliance manager, fraud investigator, title supervisor, notary journal custodian. And then, at the bottom, Mr. Daniel Mercer, claimant. Claimant, not owner, not borrower, not anything that mattered. Marisol's eyes held mine. "Public room," she said. "Glass walls again." 6 words. Witnesses again. I nodded. My fingers found my keyring in my pocket and rolled it once, metal on skin, steady. Good. 1 word. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat at the kitchen table with my binder open, light from the lamp pooling warm on the pages. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. Outside, wind pushed against the siding with a soft, persistent hush. I pulled the $50 note from the drawer and laid it beside the audit log. The paper was thin. The ink was bold. The cruelty was casual. I stared at the line, "Be smart," and felt something in me settle into a calm I recognized from deployments. The calm that arrived when the next move was clear. My phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. Another text from him. "Meet me. Just us." 4 words. A request disguised as control. I didn't answer. At 12:03 a.m., "I can explain." 3 words. Too late. At 12:19 a.m., "You won't win." 3 words. A threat with fear. Underneath. I set the phone face down and slid the note back into its sleeve, careful. I didn't want it wrinkled. I wanted it legible. Before bed, I walked through the house and checked each lock. Deadbolt, chain, windows. Quiet clicks in the dark. Habit from childhood, discipline from service. When I reached the front door, I rested my hand on the wood for 1 second and felt the faint vibration of the heater through the frame. This house had carried my fear once. Now, it carried my resolve. In the morning, I dressed again in uniform. The fabric felt crisp under my fingers, like an oath. I clipped my keyring inside my bag. I slid the binder into my arm like a shield. Marisol met me outside the title company, breath visible in the cold. The parking lot smelled like exhaust and wet asphalt. She handed me a single page. "This is your speaking plan," she said. 5 words. She didn't believe in speeches. The page had 3 lines. 1, I am the vested owner. 2, these filings are unauthorized. 3, I request referral and protection. No adjectives, no emotion. No room for my father to turn my pain into a story about my attitude. Inside the lobby, the same burnt coffee smell floated behind the counter. The brochure rack was in the same place. The fluorescent buzz was the same, but the people were different. More suits, more badges, more clipboards. A fraud investigator stood near the conference room door, a thick folder tucked under his arm. The compliance manager spoke quietly to the supervisor, both of them wearing faces that said they'd already seen enough to stop being polite. Then the front door chime rang. Cheerful. Wrong. My father walked in like he owned the air. Coat too nice, smile too practiced, eyes sweeping the room for the person he could charm first. He spotted me and stopped. For a second, his expression faltered, not because he felt guilt, but because he saw the crowd. He saw the clipboards, he saw the folders, he saw Marisol. Witnesses. He recovered fast and aimed his smile at the compliance manager. Morning, he said, too bright. I'm here to clear this up. 11 words, but the confidence was the point. The fraud investigator didn't smile back. He just nodded toward the glass conference room. In here, he said. 2 words. No warmth. As we walked toward the room, my father leaned close enough that his cologne hit me again. Expensive, empty. His voice dropped low. Take off the uniform. 4 words. A cut at my emblem. I didn't look at him. I didn't slow. Sit down, I said. 2 words, a command I'd earned. His breath caught, just a little. He followed anyway. The conference room door closed with a soft click, sealing us in with glass walls and a lobby full of strangers. The compliance manager set a small speaker on the table, black and square, the kind used for conference calls. The fraud investigator opened his folder with a slow, deliberate motion, paper whispering like a warning. Marisol slid my binder forward. The supervisor looked at my father. We have new information, she said. 4 words. Heavy. My father's smile held, barely. The fraud investigator tapped the speaker once, qua. We'll start with verification, he said. 5 words. Procedure tightening again. My gaze dropped to the speaker, and my fingertips brushed the keyring through my bag. Cold metal. Steady pulse. Because I finally understood what Marisol had saved for the meeting. That audio file wasn't just a document. It was a voice. And if it was his, it would end him in the only way that mattered. Publicly, calmly, with witnesses who couldn't be charmed. The compliance manager's finger hovered over the play button. The compliance manager's finger hovered over the play button. The conference room lights buzzed faintly, too bright for the kind of truth that was about to land. Through the glass walls, the lobby blurred into moving shapes. People shifting, waiting, pretending they weren't listening. The air smelled like burnt coffee and copier heat, and the tabletop felt cold under my fingertips when I rested my hand near my binder. My father watched the speaker like it was a gun on the table. Turn that off, he said. 3 words, too quick. The fraud investigator didn't look at him. This is verification, he said. 3 words, a door closing. My father's smile tried to return. It failed halfway. That's not me. 3 words, a lie preloaded. The compliance manager pressed play. A soft beep sounded, then static, then the faint, hollow tone of a recorded line. A woman's voice, customer verification, came through clean and professional. Thank you for calling. For security, are you the borrower? Then a man's voice answered. My father's voice, not similar, not close, exact, smooth, confident, familiar in the worst way, like a door opening when it shouldn't. Yes, the recording said, and his voice carried the same smug ease he'd brought into the lobby. I'm authorized to sign. My throat went tight, but my posture didn't change. I kept my gaze on him, not the speaker, because I wanted to see the moment the mask realized it had no face left. The verification agent continued, Can you confirm your full name? On the recording, his voice replied without hesitation. Daniel Mercer. 2 words. A confession. The room didn't move. Even the fluorescent buzz felt quieter, like the building held its breath. The agent asked, And your relationship to the property owner? His voice on the recording gave a short laugh. I'm her father. 4 words, and I saw the compliance manager's eyebrows lift a fraction. The fraud investigator's pen paused above paper. The agent said, We need the owner's consent. My father's recorded voice didn't falter. She's deployed, he said. I handle her paperwork. 6 words. A lie dressed as authority. My father across the table went rigid. His fingers curled against his thigh, knuckles whitening, the first honest thing he'd done all week. Show fear without decoration. The agent asked, Do you have written authorization? And on the recording, his voice answered, breezy and cruel. She won't notice. 3 words. A sound like a sucked-in breath moved through the room, small but collective. Through the glass, I saw a woman in the lobby stop mid-step, hand still on her stroller handle. The baby inside went quiet, as if even the infant understood the air had changed. The compliance manager let the audio keep running. The agent asked for identity documents. My father's recorded voice listed my old ID, my address, my date of birth, like he was reading items off a grocery list. When he said my rank out loud, my rank, pulled from my pay stub, something cold and sharp slid through my chest. He had tried to wear my life like a jacket. The agent said, We can't proceed without the owner. My father's recorded voice turned harder. Proceed anyway, he said. I'll sign. 4 words. Final. Criminal. The recording ended with a click. Silence settled so heavy, it felt physical. I could hear the faint whir of the building's HVAC, the tiny tap of the compliance officer's nails against her tablet as she resumed typing, documenting the collapse of my father's story in real time. My father licked his lips. That's edited, he said. 2 words. Weak. The fraud investigator finally looked at him. His voice stayed level, almost bored. It's a lender record, he said. 4 words. Reality. My father leaned toward me, eyes sharp with panic now. You set me up. 4 words. Projection. Desperate. I held his gaze. You called them. 3 words. The simplest truth. He shifted, searching for a new angle. Pity, rage, anything. I did it for us. 5 words. A lie trying on family clothes. Marisol's voice cut in, calm and clean. You said she wouldn't notice, she said. 5 words. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. My father snapped his head toward her. Stay out of this! 4 words. Small man, smaller command. The compliance manager stood, chair legs scraping softly. Mr. Mercer, she said, we're terminating any process tied to this property and forwarding this to law enforcement. 15 words, but she delivered them like a stamp hitting paper. My father's face drained. You can't. 2 words, childish. The fraud investigator closed his folder with a quiet thud. We already did, he said. 4 words. The system finally choosing the right side. My father turned back to me, voice dropping low, venom and fear mixed together. Take off the uniform. 4 words. His last attempt to strip me of my emblem. I didn't move. You already wore it, I said. 4 words, and I watched him flinch. He stood abruptly, chair scraping loud enough that heads in the lobby snapped toward the glass. He planted his hands on the table, leaning in like intimidation could reverse audio. This is my family, he hissed. 3 words wrong. I reached into my binder and pulled out the clear sleeve. The old note slid out with a soft, papery whisper. I placed it on the table between us, ink facing up, cruel and casual under fluorescent light. Then I set my keyring beside it. Metal clink, plastic tap, house key and Navy ID sharing the same small space like they always had. My father's eyes flicked to the note, and for a second his expression cracked, not remorse, not shame, recognition. He recognized the past the way a thief recognized a locked door he'd failed to break. I kept my voice low enough that only the people in the room could hear it. You left me $50, I said. 5 words. Measured. His mouth tightened. So what? 2 words, still cruel. I didn't look away. I let my calm do the cutting. So I kept the keys. 5 words. The payoff line landed like a clean blade. No yelling, no trembling, just a sentence that reframed the entire room. He hadn't been robbed, he had been stopped. Behind the glass, someone in the lobby started a slow clap. 1 clap, tentative like a question, then another, steadier. Then more hands joined, one by one, until the sound became a wave, slow, clap, spreading through strangers who didn't know my childhood but recognized accountability when it finally showed up. My father froze, eyes darting toward the lobby as if the applause physically pinned him in place. The compliance manager stepped aside, opening the conference room door. 2 uniformed officers stood just outside, calm, neutral, already briefed. Their radios crackled faintly, a dry static sound that made my father's breathing suddenly loud. Mr. Mercer, one officer said, we need you to come with us. 10 words. Polite. Unavoidable. My father's head snapped toward me. Tell them no. 3 words. Still trying to make me his shield. I didn't answer. I simply picked up my keyring and closed my binder, the zipper making a short, final sound. Zzzt, like a lock turning. The slow clap continued outside, steady and deliberate, a public rhythm that refused to be charmed into silence. My father's shoulders sagged a fraction, then stiffened as he tried to reclaim pride. He smoothed his coat with shaking hands and forced a laugh that didn't find air. "This is ridiculous," he said. 2 words. "Empty?" The officer repeated, "Sir, now." 2 words. "Heavy." My father walked out between them and the lobby parted, people stepping back not in fear but in clarity. The applause didn't turn into cheering. It stayed slow, controlled, almost respectful, like a salute made by civilians who understood what dignity looked like when it didn't beg. As he passed the reception desk, his eyes met mine one last time through the glass. For the first time, he didn't look superior. He looked caught. The door chime rang when the officers guided him outside. Cheerful, wrong. And a gust of cold air rushed in, smelling like wet pavement and exhaust. The slow clap faded as the door closed, not because people stopped believing, but because the moment had completed its job. Inside the conference room, the supervisor exhaled and rubbed her forehead once. The compliance officer kept typing, nails ticking like a metronome. Marisol gathered her papers with quiet efficiency. "We'll follow through," she said. 3 words, a promise. I nodded once. My throat burned, but my voice stayed even. "Thank you." 2 words, enough. When I stepped outside, the cold hit my lungs sharp and clean. The sky was pale and the wind cut across the parking lot like a blade that didn't care who deserved it. I watched the patrol car pull away, taillights dimming at the corner. I didn't feel joy. I felt weight lifting. Marisol walked beside me. "Change your locks," she said. 3 words, practical. "I will," I said. 2 words, done. At home, the house greeted me with its familiar quiet. The refrigerator hum, the soft settling of wood. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. I walked to the kitchen table and set my binder down, then placed the keyring beside it. House key. Navy ID. I opened the drawer and took out the old note one last time. I looked at his handwriting, at the casual cruelty of "be smart," and I realized the lesson had finally finished teaching. Smart wasn't silent endurance. Smart was documented truth. I slid the note into a sealed envelope, not to honor it, but to contain it. Then I locked it in my box, under the bed with my mother's letter and my deed copy. The things that mattered, protected by a lock I controlled. That night, I slept with the deadbolt thrown and my phone face up. Not because I expected another threat, but because I no longer feared the sound of a vibration. In the morning, I stood at my front door and held the keyring in my palm for a moment, feeling the cool metal ridges, feeling the steadiness of what I'd earned. Then I clipped it to my belt loop like it belonged there, because it did. Truth holds the keys.